welcome to our show, In Search of Civility. My name's Kathy Griesmyer, and I'll be moderating today's final discussion of the season with my co-host, Kelley Packer. In light of next month's election, today we're talking all things impacting local government elections, like bond and levy elections, to finance, infrastructure, and the actual structure and nature of electing our local leaders at the municipal level. Before we introduce our guests for today, let me share a bit of background on In Search of Civility. This series is an innovative partnership between the Association of Idaho Cities and the Boise Metro Chamber. We started this series back in January 2021 and remain committed to discussing the challenges facing our state and communities. In Search of Civility believes in the idea that truth exists and cannot be found without a sincere exchange of ideas. Civility in our discourse, we believe, is necessary for the advancement and preservation of relationships, institutions, and society. To agree, one must first disagree well. Listening actively to key stakeholders, giving your political opponents respect, the benefit of the doubt, empathy, and sympathy for their motives. Ultimately, civility gives us the opportunity for our own ideas and notions to change, bringing improvements to our own lives and even society as a whole. We believe civil dialogue can affect great change, which is why we strive to help important conversations take place. These conversations are not possible, however, without the help of our partners. We especially want to thank Holly Troxel Law Firm for sponsoring our show and have a short video to play for our listeners to learn more about their work here in Boise.
We date our roots back to the 1860s with James Hawley. Although we have a long history, we've also done well to adapt to the future and adapt to what it means to provide legal services today in what is often a high-tech world.
When you have 110 lawyers under one roof practicing together, they help each other out. It's a great value to the client.
The values we're presenting to our clients and to each other, and the way we're conducting ourselves both professionally and personally, makes it a natural fit that we're going to do our best to serve the members of our community.
We also want to thank our media partners, Idaho Ed News, the Idaho Statesman, the Idaho Press, and the Idaho Capital Sun. They provide us with a platform and audience with whom we can interact. Joining us today are four special guests with close ties to local government elections. Kelley, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about our guests today.
Thank you, Kathy. We do have an exciting panel today of state and local government leaders. So let's get those introductions started. First, we'd like to introduce Senate President Pro Tem Chuck Winder. Senator Chuck Winder was first elected to the Idaho State Senate in 2008. In 2010, he was reelected to represent District 14 and elected by his colleagues to serve as Senate Assistant Majority Leader. He served in that role until January 2018, when he was elected Idaho's Senate Majority Leader. Since the 2012 redistricting, Senator Winder has represented Legislative District 20. He is currently a member of the Senate Transportation and State Affairs Committee. He also, prior to serving in the legislature, attended the College of Idaho and upon graduation served as a naval aviator and flight instructor in the United States Navy. Thank you for your service, Senator Winder. He's a lifetime member of the United States Navy League, and Senator Winder has served his community in many local capacities. He served as a member of the Design Review Committee and Planning and Zoning Commission of the City of Boise. He also served 13 years as a commissioner of the Ada County Highway District. Senator Winder formerly served as the vice president of Ore-Ida Council and served 4 years as vice president of the Boy Scouts of America. He was the co-founder and initial president of the Joint School District No. 2 Education Foundation. He was a trustee at Albertsons College of Idaho for 12 years, and for more than 20 years led the Evening Bible Study Fellowship for Men. He has also been appointed by current and former Idaho governors to several state boards, including the Idaho Transportation Board, Governor Dirk Kempthorne's Blue Ribbon Committee, the Endowment Fund Investment Board of Idaho, and the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, PNWR, Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Senator Winder resides in Boise with his wife, Diane. Together, they raised 2 children and now enjoy spending time with their 7 grandchildren. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You bet. Senator Carrie Semmelroth. Senator Semmelroth was first appointed to the Idaho legislature in November 2021 to fill a Senate vacancy in District 17. She was reelected in 2022 and currently sits on the Senate Agriculture Affairs, Education, and Resources and Environment Committees. She works on strategic initiatives and planning for Boise State University's College of Education. She has worked in education for over 20 years and has a doctorate in education and a master's and teaching certificate in special education. She's a lifetime resident of the Boise Bench, where she lives with her significant other, Graham, 2 bonus kids, their lovable but mischievous dog, Buckley, and their sweet elderly cat, Livingston. Thank you for being with us, Senator Semmelroth.
Thank you so much.
Our third guest is Garden City Mayor John Evans. Mayor Evans grew up and was educated in the Midwest. A Vietnam veteran, John and his wife Judy were married in 1969 and have 3 children, 12 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. Thank you so much for your service as well, Mayor Evans. John and Judy moved their family to Idaho in 1975 and to Garden City in 1988. Since his arrival in Idaho, Mayor Evans has been primarily involved in the construction industry. Since 1985, he has been in the residential real estate development business in Ada and Canyon counties. He is currently developing home sites in Caldwell. John has not engaged in any business activity in Garden City since his election to the City Council in 1995. Prior to his election as mayor in November of 2005, Mayor Evans served on the Garden City Planning and Zoning Commission from 1992 to 1995 and served for 8 years on the Capital Investment Citizens Advisory Committee of the Ada County Highway District. In 1995, he was elected to the Garden City Council. While on the City Council, he served several one-year terms as president of the City Council, council liaison to the Garden City Police Department, and council liaison to the Library Board, a position he held for 10 years. He also performed the council oversight function for the construction of the police department building in 1999 and the new City Hall/Library building in 2004. Mayor Evans also serves on the boards of the Community Planning Association, also known as Compass, and Valley Regional Transit, BRT. Thank you for being with us, Mayor. Last but not least, we have our City of Pocatello Mayor, Brian Bladd. Mayor Bladd spent many years as a small business owner in Pocatello before jumping into local politics. He was sworn into office for his first term as mayor in January 2010. He was reelected to the office of mayor in November 2013, where he continues to serve. He manages the day-to-day operations of city government and presides over the meetings of the City Council. In his previous life, Mayor Bladd served for 12 years on the executive board of the nonprofit Low in Blanket Contractors Association and served for 3 years as an officer. He is internationally recognized as an expert in the insulation industry and spent 10 years training and teaching insulation companies throughout North America on the importance of energy efficient building. As mayor, he continues to be active in the community. He serves on various boards and committees such as the Pocatello Development Authority, Bannock Development Corporation, and the ISU College of Technology Advisory Board, to name a few. He participates in activities such as Pedal Fest Bicycle Challenge, Pocatello Marathon, Chamber Putt-Putt Golf Tournament, and is the reigning Dancing with the Pocatello Stars champion and Kiwanis Pancake Flipping champion. He is also a local television celebrity who hosts his own television show, Calling City Hall, on government access television. Mayor Bladd and his wife, Laura, have 4 children, Ben, Jade, Jordan, and Bryson. Thank you for being with us, Mayor.
Thank
All
you.
right, Kathy, I will turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kelley. We can go ahead and jump into some questions. And so, as I mentioned, today is all about local elections in light of the November local elections taking place early next month. And so we wanted to focus today's conversation on 2 areas impacting local governments, one around the bond and levy elections, as well as just the actual elections of our local leaders. So first, we thought we'd start with changes to local bond and levy elections. So for our panelists, the question is, what has the legislature been focusing on in the past few years on this topic? And do you think it helps or hinders local government? And let's start in the order in which we did introductions. So Pro Tem, if you can kick us off. Then we'll do Senator Semmelroth, and then Mayor Evans, and then Mayor Bladd.
Thanks, Kathy. That's an intriguing question when you take some time to think about it as to kind of what the intention of the legislature is over the past 3 years. But, I think the idea of bonding and debt in our state is significantly controlled by our Idaho Constitution, which requires a 2/3 public vote on long-term public debt. State like Utah only has a simple majority, so it's much easier to get things put together and financed. I think we've talked about everything from local option taxes to, where there was no real debt involved, taking it down to a simple majority. And a lot of the House leadership objected to that and tried to push it to, a 2/3 vote, even though there was no constitutional restriction because there wasn't any debt. So those are kind of the political headwinds we have here, trying to deal with this. I keep, saying we need to figure out more tools to help our local governments, but that is a challenge here.
Thank you, Pro Tem. All right, Senator Summeroff.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you so much for having me. At the beginning of your introduction, Kathy, you mentioned listening as one of the key indicators for success in civility, our conversations. And I just wanted to give already recognize to our esteemed mayors that I'm really looking forward to listening to what they have to say, as they are our local elected officials. When you think about our system of government, whether starting nationally, we are founded on a concept of federalism, right? So we believe that power is centralized and then distributed to more local offices. And that is the tension that founded this country, and it still exists today. So the fact that we're having these conversations, I guess, shows how current or on topic we are for the values that our society has around government. One of the parts of this question is really looking around, is talking about, the process of local elections. And I'm sure we'll get into this later in this conversation, but the state legislature at this time, we haven't necessarily worked on legislation that's directly impacting the election process itself, but we have focused on some of the circumstances around it. So for example, last session, we worked on House Bill 292 that removed the March election date for school bonds and levies. So, and it wasn't necessarily changing the majority or anything along those lines. There's been other legislation over the last few years that have done similar, addressed similar topics where we're walking around the outside of the local election process and not necessarily addressing that piece. Idaho has a history, and I can get into that later, but I'm really interested to turn the questions now over to the mayors to hear what they have to say.
Thank you, Senator Summeroff. Mayor Evans.
Well, thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. The bond and levy question really, when it in the context of the local elected, those issues come up as a result of a need that's been identified locally. And one of the challenges we have is fulfilling the need. As a city leader, cities are not required to be in existence in the state of Idaho. Counties are required. Cities are formed essentially to enhance service levels in areas that the local populace demands. Examples of that are obvious are libraries, parks, and police, more than the county government would be able to provide. So when we get to a situation where we need to look at a further enhancement to fulfill our obligation to our residents, sometimes that requires a bond or a levy consideration. And the question that really resonates with us is, how far should local control go? And what the thresholds should be are are different, of course, depending on whether you have a permanent bond or override or whether you have a temporary override to deal with a specific need. So as we navigate this, I think most of the emphasis from my personal perspective ends up a focus on schools, because those bonds come up regularly, virtually, it seems like every year. And when you're obligating the general population, discussion on what those thresholds for approval should be is a legitimate discussion, and there are lots of opinions about that. But I think the basic message I would send is they aren't willy-nilly. Bonds are directed to fill a need that's been identified by your local population.
Thank you, Mayor Evans. And then we'll go ahead and end with Mayor Blatt.
Kathy, thank you very much for having us on this program. It's a great program to be a part of, and it's a pleasure for me to be here as well. When you start talking about taxes, and bonds really truly are taxes, everybody gets a little bit excited and stuff. I know that cities, I don't know one city that has ever gone out for a bond election just on a willy-nilly idea that we might want to build something new or create a larger government. And so as Mayor Evans just stated, they really truly are to help the communities provide a service or provide what the populace is looking for and asking for. And so as we look at it as a 2/3 majority, we can have a majority of people that would like or feel the need for something, but 1 in 3 people can prevent that from happening. And so that's a difficult number to get over. 66% is a very difficult number. A simple majority, I don't know if as the Senate Pro Tem mentioned, I don't know that that also would be the best thing either for the city. So I'm just glad I'm not the one that has to make those decisions and turn those into laws and stuff. And we leave it up to the senators and the House of Representatives there. But my hope is that there's a happy medium somewhere that we can come to that would be achievable, but we've got to be able to make those to make that happen. One thing that's very difficult when it comes to a bond is if a city goes out to a bond, we can't talk about the benefits of that bond. We can't try to convince or try to educate the public of the benefits of that bond and that election. We can just throw things out there that, facts. But if you're against it, then you can definitely campaign against it. And that also sets that bond back, and it's difficult to achieve. So we need, I think that it would be nice to be able to at least express an opinion of why it's important and things to do. The Senate Pro Tem also mentioned the local option tax, and that local option tax option sounds like a really good idea, depending on how it is all put together. If we have cities in a county that are fighting over the first in line, then I think it defeats the purpose of a local option tax. And so I'm one of the few mayors in the state that I'm not 100% convinced that is the best option, is a local option tax for cities and communities. And so it's going to be interesting to see how we pull this all together. And like I said before, I don't envy the Senate or the House in making these rules, but it's nice to be able to be a part of the conversation at the beginning and hopefully stay in that conversation as they're making these rules and these changes.
Thank you, Mayor Blatt. You brought up some really good points, and I think it's really important to maybe explore this a little bit further. As you mentioned, the Senator Pro Tem Winder mentioned that the Constitution actually sets that 2/3 for indebtedness. However, I do know that we have some statutory provisions and then also some legislative provisions that allows for differences depending on the different decisions that are being made or what the public's weighing in on. Some are just simple majority, some are that 2/3 threshold. I don't know if there's anything in between, as was mentioned by Mayor Blatt, but that might be, something to look at as we further have these discussions. I think that's really important. So I want to pose now the question about that threshold. As I mentioned, it seems that the state, with their appropriation budgets and different things, don't necessarily have to hit that 2/3 threshold for some of the spending they do, and including the Garvey bonds and things like that. And so help our viewers understand from your perspectives, either at the local level or the state level, why there seems to be a different set of standards, maybe, for lack of a better way to say it, on that voting threshold for local governments versus the state, or just as important, maybe issue related rather than strictly government jurisdiction related. So I'm going to go backwards. We're going to start with Mayor Blatt, and then we'll go to Mayor Evans and to Senator Semmelroth, and then to the Pro Tem. So Mayor Blatt.
First of all, Kelley, I wish that you wouldn't have started backwards.
I'm sure.
I like the idea of listening to some answers and then giving mine. That's always been an interesting question. There's a lot of interesting things that are different between the state and the local governments, and how we function, and how we can fund things, and the meetings that we can have, and stuff. And so it's I don't really know how to answer the question of the thresholds, other than it just shows that on the state level, when they need to do something, they can move on it. On a local level, when we need to do something, it takes 6 to 8 to 10 months to move on it. And I am a person that likes to move at the speed of business, and in a local area, we do not have the opportunities to move at the speed of business. In fact, I believe it slows commerce down. I think it slows progress down. I think that it's a dangerous place for the cities to be, but I also understand, as Mayor Evans stated, in Idaho, we don't have to have cities. And we function under the authority of the state, and so there's the threshold to me. It would be nice to see the threshold be increased, and if it were with legislators and stuff, if it were a 2/3, then that might start making people think twice about how the local elections and local thresholds end up being. But right now it is what it is, and we will continue to function the way we need to under that current laws and policies.
Thank you, Mayor Blatt, and thank you for being a good sport. Mayor Evans.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor, for being a good sport. I appreciate that as well. But why is there a higher threshold? Well, I think the one obvious answer is the legislature feels they need a higher level of control over local taxing and spending authority than they impose on themselves. There's a little different check and balance, of course, with the legislature, because at the end of the day, the governor's empowered to make a decision that would require the legislature to have a supermajority to enact a law. So if the governor vetoes an appropriation, then that throws the supermajority back to the legislature to remedy that if they so choose. So, I'm not really critical of the current system because of the check and balance and the three in the between the legislature and the governor's office. But I think I think the challenge that we have that we'll be talking about through some of these other questions today, hopefully, is the relationship between local government and the legislative arm of the state government, because the relationships have a tendency to breed trust, and there's skepticism that I think is evident during the legislative session over decisions local governments make sometimes. And I think it's easy for us on the local government side to become them collectively in a discussion instead of, well, let's talk to Brian or John about this or that. And let's get into the weeds a little more about motivation, policy, goals, and procedures and safeguards that are embedded in the local systems. So that's kind of my non-answer to the specific question, but it's the perceptions.
Thank you, Mayor Evans. All right, Senator Semmelroth.
Thank you. And just jumping off of where Mayor Evans left off, those conversations and collaborations across mayors and other local elected officials, it would be really interesting to hear if they were able to build working groups together to hear what their voting thresholds would be for their local communities, rather than having the state legislature set those. Some of our voting thresholds for different entities have been in place since late 1800s, while others we continue to tinker with, right? So school bonds are definitely something that we're familiar with that have been adjusted over time. At one point they were majority, then it went to 55%, then it went to 67%, and then to 2/3 majority, right? That you could make an argument, and I'm being really careful. I'm not trying to get into politics. I'm not trying to be specific to issues, but you could make an argument that it is challenging to expect a group of voters to have that high of a turnout on some of these issues that potentially could already be inherently biased if the concept, like Mayor Blad raised, if it's around the idea that we're essentially creating a new tax for voters. Those thresholds seem very high in comparison to the legislature, where for state laws, we just need a majority vote. Yes, we need 2/3 majority for overriding the governor's veto and joint resolutions. But as Kelley mentioned, for appropriations bills, those are just majority votes. And it's our job to show up and vote, right? We have our constitutional requirement to balance the budget, and then we're supposed to vote on laws. Our constituents and regular Idahoans don't necessarily have those same requirements, especially when you add on the complexities of daily life and getting out to the polls and staying informed on issues. And so those voting thresholds, I absolutely can see it from a perspective that they can be very challenging for our communities when trying to address local issues.
Thank you, Senator Semmelroth. That was something I'd never really thought about before, the whole happening to show up to a vote versus being voluntary. That's very interesting. I appreciate your perspective there. Senator Pro Tem.
Just a couple quick, based on some of the comments that were made. You raised the issue, Kelley, of the Garvey bonds and why are they different? They're not a general obligation bond of the state. They obligated federal funds. And then there's a 1-year 10% match that can come or go, so you're not in a long-term obligation for that. The threshold for long-term debt is 2/3. For levies is simple majority plus 1. Then Mayor Evans brought up a good comment about, it takes us a 2/3 vote to overturn a governor's veto. Again, those are the safeguards. The Constitution requires for long-term debt that it be 2/3. So even for the state, like if they were going to go out and didn't have revenue bonds, even revenue bonds for local governments can be based, and build parking structures with them at the airport. You do lots of different things with them. Those do not require a public vote. So there are some tools out there. The state doesn't take all the advantage, I don't think. There are some things that are helpful to local governments. So I think on one hand, there's a pretty good balance. But on the other hand, you think about it, what revenues do the locals have? Some property tax. We've been trying to provide property tax relief for people. We've been trying to replace those property taxes to local governments so they're not short those funds. But there's going to be more and more pressure on property tax relief, I think, in the coming session and for years in ahead too. So that's going to be something we're going to have to deal with. As I mentioned in my opening comments, a state like Utah, even for long-term debt, only requires 50% plus one. Could we ever get to that in Idaho? I don't know. We talked about, well, what if we just moved it to 60%? Because it seems like a lot of long-term debt bond votes, it shows up at 63.5 or 64% in favor. So if you lowered it to the 60%, it would take, 4 out of 10 to defeat it, which, is that really what a Republican form of government's about, or a Democratic form of government about? One man, one vote, one woman, one vote. So I think there are some things that we need to talk about and continue to try and figure out ways to fund local governments. We've been trying to give surplus money back to local governments for roads and those types of things, bridges. So there is an effort. There are probably a few, I won't mention any names, that kind of have a vendetta against cities and counties, but I think as a whole, the legislature tries to listen and tries to provide, the tools that you all need to do and provide the services you need. So it'll be an ongoing discussion, I'm sure, for quite a while.
Thank you, Pro Tem. It's definitely an ongoing conversation and certainly a balancing act between, the two checks on government, the two levels of government, and local needs, state needs, and how do we balance that ultimately in service of our shared constituents. So I'm going to transition us away a little bit from the bond and levy discussion and talk more about how we're directly electing our local elected officials. And so wanted to talk about kind of a slew of bills we've seen over the past few years around moving municipal races from odd election years to an even year election cycle when the state legislature or our state constitutional officers are being elected. And then even some discussions around directly requiring municipal races to become partisan elections. So in doing so, we're kind of talking about both policy proposals and in effect sort of partisanizing municipal races despite these offices currently being structured as nonpartisan. And so from your perspective, and we'll start with the Pro Tem again, we'd be curious to hear what do you feel are the pros and the cons of this potential change and how we're structuring the direct election, particularly of city leaders and city issues?
Well, as you all know, we put districts requirements in for cities over 100,000 with the hopes of getting a broader representation geographically within the communities. I don't know how still in those first few election cycles to see how that all plays out, but Boise and Meridian have redistricted their city elections, and we'll just, I think, have to watch and see how it works or not. As far as partisan, I know there's an effort, and this is kind of interesting, I think, in our state, and probably several other states where the urban areas are much more, there are more members of the Democratic Party that are voting than the Republicans. I still think in Boise City, there's probably more Republicans than there are Democrats, but the Democrats will go vote at an 85% turnout and the Republicans will vote at a 56% turnout. It's hard to get the Republicans to vote in nonpartisan elections for some reason. I don't know exactly why. There'll be a push to at least, do some things that we've heard about, just putting an R by somebody's name, putting a D by somebody's name, putting an independent by somebody's name. I don't think, even though there are some out there that would like to see, partisan city and county elections, but primarily for your cities, that that's going to happen in the near future.
Thank you, Pro Tem. If we can go to Senator Summerroth next.
Yeah, this is such an interesting question and covers so many concepts. The idea that, well, so just taking a step back, of course, when we have elections in off years and at least on paper appear to be nonpartisan, we know that that typically equates to low voter turnout. So you could make an argument just on that idea alone that it's important to take measures to increase voter turnout as much as we can. However, there's a couple other underlying concepts here. When we talk about the partisan nature of potentially making our elected or our local races partisan, in the past, research was really focused around the idea that these nonpartisan races actually didn't affect policy, and there just wasn't good ways to measure it. However, recent research from 2018 on has found that partisan ideas do come into what we consider to be these nonpartisan seats and nonpartisan elections. And they show up in fiscal policies and other types of local policies. I think on paper, we think that these are nonpartisan races. We know, though, in the enactment of policies, they can show up as partisan. But, and I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over my words here. I'm just trying to be careful. When I hear this conversation, what I'm hearing also, there's this undertone around our recent shift in politics over these last few years in that they've become so much more extreme. Things have become hyper partisan. And I have too many thoughts for today to talk around those issues. But personally, and this is separate from as a senator representing my district, personally, I work very hard in my working relationships professionally in the State House and in other aspects of my life to unwind the confines of partisan politics. I work really hard to separate myself from that. And I would love to see our local races stay nonpartisan, even though we know that there could potentially be some policy impacts. I would love for them to stay the way that they are, just as one area that we can continue to protect from some of the extremism that we've been seeing over these last few years.
Thank you, Senator Summerroth. We'll go to Mayor Evans and then to Mayor Blad to get the local elected's perspective on this.
Well, just from being around the Capitol during the session and other conversations, to deal with the going from odd year to even years, the pros I've heard are voter turnout. You get more turnout if you've got more items on the ballot. Fewer election dates. It would shine a light on some of the more obscure races like fire district commissioners, as an example, your cemetery district commissioners. I've never even seen a ballot for the cemetery district here locally, for example. So those are some of the arguments I've heard in favor. Cons, really, you get a pretty busy ballot. Local races would likely be at the bottom of the ballot. The campaigning itself, with the literature that's produced, you're going to have a lot of clutter in the election. And it certainly would lend itself more to partisan identification at the lower end of the ticket, if in fact local races were at the lower end. I appreciate the fact that political ideology will show up in local policies from time to time, certainly. But we've got 199 cities in Idaho, probably in the neighborhood of 190 of those are dealing with sewer, water, trash, police, libraries, parks, and land use. And that's where we live. And those are those typically for almost all the cities in Idaho. We are drawing in aspects that might be considered partisan hot buttons, various social issues. Very few of us, very few exceptions, cities in Idaho don't have housing programs, don't have a homeless issue to deal with, aren't dealing with content in libraries, these kinds of things. So I'm a proponent of retaining the nonpartisan aspect of local elections, and I prefer having them on a cycle that's unique to the locals, the nonpartisans. You give up voter turnout, I concede that, but you're able to focus your efforts on those specific city races with maybe some other issues like a bond or something that might come up, and get those that are interested in their local government an opportunity to focus on that and not get lost in the clutter of a large election. So those are just some thoughts.
Kelley, could I add one thing? Kelley is pro tem. Could I add
Sure.
one?
Sure. And then we'll go to Mayor Blatt. You bet.
Okay. Election consolidation has been going on for many, many years. It started when I actually got in the Senate, 15 years ago. They were talking about election consolidation. Again, trying to reduce the number of elections, voter fatigue, all the different things that go on. We've been fighting over the presidential primary this year, whether and we tried to pass a bill that would consolidate all, elections in May. And that would have allowed the school bonds and those types of things to occur when there's a better turnout. So this has been ongoing for a while. I don't think it's going to go away. Again, I think when it comes to partisan issues, those are individual preferences politically and normally. But I also think there's a fear, like in Boise, where there's a good stronghold of Democratic voters that they can dominate through that. And there's some fear of that by members of the legislature. So thank you for letting me interrupt.
Thank you, Pro Tem. Go ahead, Mayor Blatt.
All right, thank you. This is an interesting question to me as well. I've heard the same reasons that Mayor Evans mentioned, voter turnout and the fear of there's a lot of I guess anxiety out there for our legislators because our local elections are not partisan, and the pro tem just mentioned that it's been a discussion that they've had since he became a legislator, and it's an interesting dynamic, if you ask me, of why we're worried about it, because literally local elections, we don't deal with partisan politics. We don't deal with partisan issues. Mayor Evans named a few things. We deal with police and parks and a number of other things, libraries, fire districts, and so there's a reason why it hasn't been political. I think that if you want to become partisan, no matter what position you're in, you can become partisan. I don't think that it is inherent that you just, I'm a Republican, so I think this way, or I'm a Democrat, I think this way. I think that if you want to make something that way, that's the case. And I've had an experience where I've been accused of being both. I've been accused of being the only Democrat somebody's voted for, and I've been accused of being the only Republican somebody else has voted for. And I think that's the way it's supposed to be. Is you're on a local level. We don't deal with partisan politics, and so that. I'm a proponent to keeping the election where it is. With the odd year elections, I think that it's an important piece to do. I think we get drowned out on we absolutely get drowned out with all the other messages, and the local elections are what affects people locally more than anything else. And so I think that that it's dangerous. To the Senator Pro Tem's question, or thing that Democrats turn out at like an 80, I think he said 80% turnout to much lower turnout on Republicans. On a local level, I don't know how to fix that, and I don't think changing things around and making them a partisan ballot changes that. And so I think that's within a party issue, and a party needs to figure out what to do on that one. Personally, I don't know how we do that. I think it's important for us to remember who we represent. Once we are elected on a local level, we represent everybody in the community, if they voted for us or not. And we need to lend an ear to everybody that has a question or concern or any of that. We need to take all of those into account. It's interesting on a local level. One of the toughest decisions that we have sometimes is whether or not a dog or a pet, an animal, that's the big issue in the community for the time. Do you get 6 chickens or 5 chickens? Can you have a rooster? That's what we're dealing with, and that's not a Republican or a Democrat issue. That's just a human issue, I guess. The pothole doesn't care if you're left or right. It doesn't matter how it gets filled. It just matters if it gets filled. And so those are the things that we need to work with. And I do think that for the majority, if you have a lack of people showing up, that means people are complacent or they're happy with the representation that they are receiving. And I think that locally, you have a lot of very good elected officials locally that take their job very serious, that are concerned with the public, concerned with their communities, and they really truly want to make a difference in their community. And that's how you do it. It doesn't matter if you have an R or a D by your name. And so I would be opposed to changing the way the cycle is. I would be opposed to making it a partisan position as well. I don't think we can represent our entire communities locally if we are a position. In fact, I would almost take it further and say county commissioners and counties should also be nonpartisan, but that's a whole discussion for another day.
Thank you, Merblad. You all brought up some great comments and questions and thoughts for me. I think that's great. And so along that line, we're talking about, the fact that the legislature initially, when they did set up cities, did make them to be nonpartisan. And maybe we don't necessarily know 100% the reasoning behind that, but I guess I would like to have this body think through whether or not the same reasoning still exists, or if we feel like, and maybe you've kind of answered and touched on it a little bit, but maybe elaborate a little bit more on whether or not locals really should be partisan or not, if it is really about voter fatigue, because I think to that regard, at least from my opinion, if I had a 4-page ballot, I would get way more tired than I would having to go once or twice a year to the ballot box. So I guess it's all about how you look at it and what's really important in the moment. But why do we think the legislature initially made city races nonpartisan? And do we feel like those reasons still exist, or if that should be undone? And I'm going to mix it up a little bit, Mayor Blatt. I'm surprising you. Yes, I am.
Okay.
I'm going to start with Mayor still, but I'm going to start with Mayor Evans and then go to you. And we're going to then go to Pro Tem Winder and then to Senator Summerall. Just mixing it up a little bit. Keep you on your toes.
It just seems like you're throwing him the easy one, but okay.
Okay.
Love it.
Well, thank you, Kelley. I'm making a presumption with my answer because I'm not a youngster, but I wasn't around when the decision was made to have local elections as nonpartisan. I think I default back to what I've said previously, and that is locally, historically, typically, we've dealt with issues that are kind of the nuts and bolts, operational kinds of decisions that affect the day-to-day lives of our communities. Mayor Blatt mentioned fixing potholes, but parks and police and land use. I tell you, you have a land use hearing when someone has made an application under the Local Land Use Planning Act, and there isn't a partisan perspective on whether you want that building next to your subdivision or not, or whatever the particular issue is. So my presumption is that the legislature understood, at least believed at the time, that the types of issues that are going to be dealt with locally didn't carry that partisan, for the purposes of this discussion, I'll call it baggage, that created an expectation of an outcome. The expectation of the outcome for the nonpartisan is what benefits the community, looking through the lens of the day-to-day operations of the city. Take it away, Brian. Mayor Blatt.
Well, Mayor Evans, thank you for that. And I would be presuming a number of things as well to answer why they decided to do this and leave these non-partisan positions. But I think that I think the legislature in the past was had it right. These are not partisan positions, and they're not partisan issues that we're dealing with. They knew that we would be dealing with local land issues, local potholes, if you will. They knew that we would be dealing with the local things opposed to on a more of a statewide or federal basis. And so I don't think there's any reason to change it back or change it at all. I think that it should stay the same. And I think that there was wisdom in it. There are some things just recently that our legislators have passed that I disagreed with, but they there's wisdom in what they did. They understood both sides of a topic, and I support what they've done in the past and what they're doing. And so I think that there's wisdom in what they do with locals. The Senate Pro Tem mentioned, most people want to help and want to do what's right and the best for the entire state, which includes the local governments. And he's not wrong. And it's nice to have the relationships that we have with our representatives. And so, though sometimes we may disagree with what they come down with, I think ultimately there's wisdom in what they do, and I would not even presume that it would make sense to change it at this point. I think that there's wisdom in locals being nonpartisan.
Thank you. Pro Tem Winder.
Really an interesting question from the standpoint of Mayor Evans mentioned it, that he wasn't around when they wrote the Constitution or set up the codes for the cities, but we do have impact on the code today. The Constitution's been amended many, many times. It's basically the document that controls government, and the citizens can make changes to it on an ongoing basis. I think, and I would guess not a whole lot's changed since the state was set up to today. There were differences of opinion. There were probably the strong, right, strong left politics. We know they used to have duels and shoot each other when they disagreed and things. So we look for civility today, which I think we certainly have more civility today maybe than they did when they started, and the founding fathers had some significant arguments. But I think what's going on in our whole country is polarization of people. And you've got this force of the people that seem to be the most passionate about any issue are going to be kind of on the extremes. I'm involved in an organization called Senate Presidents, and I talk to my friends from Hawaii. They have no Republicans in their Senate, but they have the same problems of what they would consider their far left, trying to push them further away to the left, away from moderation in the state. So this is an ongoing thing, but I really think, at least in my opinion, it comes down to just our culture today, the society itself. We've become much more opinionated. We have social media that you can criticize within seconds, anything that you don't like. There are no truth censors of what's put out there. And so there's a lot of stuff going on that way. And I think it all just comes down to fear. And I'll give you an example. The library bills that were considered last year were based on a fear brought to us from both urban areas and rural areas that inappropriate material was made available to kids based upon being too young in the parents' opinion to see the information. You can argue that back and forth as freedom of speech, what's best for the kids and all that. But I think it's just that whole idea of, they're trying to protect their kids. The people, it seems like, that are moving here are really getting engaged. They're moving the political compass. So I think you're going to see more and more of these types of issues, social issues, come up. And when a city council talks about a sanctuary city, or doing things that make indications that they'll, when we pass, and this is a tough one, but I put it out there, abortion laws, and local governments say they're willing to give their people time off to go do that, and things like that. That, again, is part of the polarization that's going on. And people say, well, see, look what local government's doing. And it's a partisan issue because of abortion or gay rights or whatever it might be. And so that's kind of, I think, where a lot of this tension comes from. We're not going to solve it, in the immediate future. But I think, to me, that's one of the problems that are impacting this whole idea of, well, if local government is putting policies in place that are contradictory to, let's say, half of the state or 60% of the state, the more rural areas of the state, then there has to be some change. And I'm not saying that I don't support the partisan election at local levels, but I'm telling you what's going on within our body and trying to explain that to you.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. I understand that, especially you in a leadership position, you do have that differing view and have had that input from so many different sides as far as what's driving it. I appreciate that. Senator Summerroth, we'll end with you. And then I think we have just one quick question after that we'll have Kathy post to the group.
Thank you, Kelley. And like you, when you first asked this question, I similarly was wondering around historical precedents and legislative intent that may or may not exist. So in reading up, in trying to learn more about this issue, that there was a national movement in the early 20th century for local elections to be nonpartisan. So in Idaho in 1915, the legislature passed House Bill 373 to establish nonpartisan municipal elections. It did not pass the Senate. A few years later, in 1921, Senate Bill 330 allowed for two types of nominations, by convention or by petition. And the convention would be partisan and petition would be nonpartisan. Eventually, after a history of, different types of legislation, at some point, Boise established, in the early 20th century, Boise established nonpartisan municipal elections. And then by the mid 20th century, the rest of the state followed. So if we use the argument solely on historical precedent, you could argue that really was the intent, was to have nonpartisan municipal elections.
That was very interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Senator Summerroth, that's a helpful history lesson in thinking about where we've been. We're over time, and so I do want to move to closing. And so hope in your final comments, sort of a reflection, would love to hear from all of you. What do you feel is needed to help strengthen the relationship between local and state elected officials so that there's this deeper, not only ability to communicate and share needs and have an understanding, really ultimately in the hopes that both sets of government can better come together to work, ultimately in service to their shared constituency, right? You have folks voting in local city elections who are also voting for state legislative elections. And so how can we work to strengthen that joint, those joint efforts? And if anyone, maybe we'll start with Pro Tem, just a quick.
Okay, just quick comment. I really think that the whole basis for civility in any setting is understanding the other person and treating that person respectfully, being willing to listen to them, being willing to collaborate and to try and come up with the best decisions that are best for the vast majority of the society. So to me, it's, again, relationship based, getting to know one another. I've known John for, seems like forever. And Kelley, you, Kathy, back to ACLU days and things like that. So I think these relationships are what's key to people communicating. If you don't know somebody, all you do is believe what you hear on the internet. That isn't who that person really is.
Great. Thank you, Pro Tem. Senator Summerroth, your final thoughts.
I so agree with what Pro Tem said. Along with that, I think collaboration is the key. And so having our local cities, counties, regional areas, being able to organize around issues that really matter to them is one place to start in terms of building strength and advocacy. Another area for potential collaboration can be led by the state. So if there's a particular issue that the state wants regional areas, cities to innovate, that could provide it. And so rather than being punitive, it could be providing incentives for our local areas and municipalities to apply for funds and or other incentives that might exist in terms of solving problems and addressing community issues. And then with that in mind, the last potential area for collaboration includes somebody we haven't mentioned, which is the governor. The governor and the governor's staff, they have an insight into statewide needs more so than I do as a senator for my district. And that big picture view that the governor's office brings can help also mobilize cities and counties to organize around issues that really matter and help move the state forward.
Great. Thank you, Senator. We'll go to Mayor Evans and then Mayor Blad.
Thank you. I don't have a lot to add. I think Senator Winder said it. We're all in the people business, regardless of what we do. And developing the relationships necessary to have the conversations in a respectful, safe atmosphere. I know I can visit with Senator Winder on anything, whether we would agree on it or not, and I'll leave the room feeling good that I was heard and that consideration for what I might have said will be there. So it just takes a lot of effort, and it takes a growing group like the group on this panel today, and you just gotta keep after it, because we have changes every 2 years, and we just gotta stay with the program and work on the relationships. That's I can't add any more. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to weigh in on this a little bit. And everything really, truly pretty much been said. Senate Pro Tem, talked a little bit about just treating people like people. Don't treat them like a piece of furniture or anything else. Just know that everybody you're talking to is either a mother or a father, a brother, a sister, a grandparent. There's something. People love them, and we need to remember that always. One thing that I've noticed that I do not like is oftentimes I see we play the blame game. Well, if the legislature would have done this, then it would have been easier for us. And the legislators are saying, well, if the cities were responsible, then we wouldn't have to do what we're doing here. And I think we stopped playing the blame game. And I think this forum right here is a great example of being able to talk together, work together, and actually come to good solutions. And I think that if there was more of this happening in our state, then the polarization that the Senate Pro Tem mentioned might not happen as much. If we just remember that we work with the same people, we represent the same people, regardless of what office we sit in. And so this is, I think, a great forum, and I am excited to be able to continue to work with any and all legislators, other mayors, commissions, things, people like that we can sit down and, like Mayor Evans said, we don't have to necessarily agree all the time, but we can at least feel like we've been heard and at least feel good about the conversations. And so I appreciate where we are right now. And so thank you.
Great. Thank you all to our wonderful guests, and thank you to those who are watching us online. Apologies for creeping into your 1 o'clock hour. Especially want to thank today's guests, Pro Tem Winder, Senator Summelroth, Mayor Evans, and Mayor Blad for joining us for this important discussion, especially as our final episode for the season. We would also like to thank the Association of Idaho Cities, the Boise Metro Chamber, along with our media partners, Idaho Ed News, the Idaho Statesman, the Idaho Press, and Capital Sun. And a big thanks to our incredible presenting sponsor, Holly Troxel. I just want a big thank you from myself and from Kelley for all of For all of you who have tuned in for the 2023 season of In Search of Civility, we'll be signing off for the holiday season and legislative session, but we'll be back again next year for more important conversations, and we look forward to seeing you all then. Hope you all have a wonderful Monday. Thanks.